Welcome back, students. Today I am here with the third part of the story, An Angel in Disguise. So, till now, what we have read is Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, brings Maggie to his house and he requests his wife that she should be kind to her. Look at her kindly, Jane. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of her dead mother and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwanted eloquence to his lips. So we have read that he was requesting his wife that she should be kind towards this girl who is an orphan now, and the pain and the suffering she has to undergo in her future life. Mrs. Thompson did not reply, but presently turned towards the little chamber where her husband had deposited Maggie, and pushing open the door, went quietly in. So Mrs. Thompson did not reply to what her husband told her, but quietly she went into that room where Maggie was lying. Joe did not follow. He saw that her state had changed and felt that it would be best to leave her alone with the child. So Joe did not follow his wife. He thought that it would be better if he would give some time to his wife and Maggie together. So he went to his shop, which stood near the house, and worked until dusky evening released him from labor. And that is why what he did, he went away to his shop for his work until dusky evening, until it was evening, and then he was free from his hard work in his shop. A light shining through the little chamber window was the first object that attracted Joe's attention on turning towards the house. So, after his day's work in the evening, when he was returning, he saw that there was light in that room where he had put Maggie. So, he saw from the window light in the room. It was a good omen. That was really very good sign that where he had kept Maggie, that room was lit. The path led him by this windows, and when quite opposite, he could not help pausing to look in. So he went towards his house, and on the way, he came across that window. He came across that room in which he had put Maggie, and the window was lit. So he started peeping in. He started looking in, like he wanted to see what was going on inside the room. It was dark enough outside to screen him from observation. So it was dark outside. That is why no one would be able to find out that he is peeping inside his own house. Maggie lay a little raised on the pillow with the lamp shining full upon her face. So he found that Maggie was lying on the bed and she was raised a little on the pillow, and the light of the lamp was shining upon her face. Mrs. Thompson was sitting by the bed, talking to the child, but her back was towards the window, so that her countenance was not seen. So Mrs. Thompson, she was sitting by the side of the bed, and she was talking to Maggie. But her countenance, but her face could not be seen because her back was towards the window. So Mr. Thompson could not see her expressions. From Maggie's face, therefore, Joe must read the character of their intercourse. And now he had no other option. But from Maggie's face, now he has to make out the intercourse, he has to make out the discussion between Maggie and his wife. He saw that her eyes were intently fixed upon his wife, that now and then few words came, as if in answers from her lips, that her expression was sad and tender, but he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. So when he saw inside, he found that her eyes, her here refers to Maggie, so her eyes were greatly fixed upon his wife. Maggie was looking continuously on his wife, and now and then she was uttering a few words, and Mr. Thompson made out that she is answering to the questions of his wife. Though the expression on Maggie's face was sad and tender, but the expressions were not of bitterness or pain. From this he concluded that his wife was kind towards the girl. A deep drawn breath was followed by one of relief as a weight lifted itself from his heart. So now Mr. Joe Thompson, he was a little bit relieved, as if the weight that his wife is not going to take care of this girl, that weight was lifted from his heart. On entering, Joe did not immediately go to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child nor manifest any concern in regard to her. So, when Joe Thompson entered his house, immediately he thought he should not go to that room where Maggie was lying. And with a heavy tread, with a heavy walk, he went inside the kitchen. And Mrs. Joe Thompson hurriedly followed Joe Thompson. She followed her husband towards the kitchen. And Mr. Joe Thompson thought that it would be best that he should not refer to the child now. He should not ask any question to his wife regarding the girl. How soon will supper be ready? He asked. So he asked his wife how soon the supper would be ready. Right soon, answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning bustle about. So Mrs. Thompson replied to her husband that rightly she will prepare the supper. And then she started doing the kitchen chores so that she could complete her work. There was no asperity in her word. So there was no asperity. Asperity means there was no harshness in her voice. After washing from his hands and face the dust and soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. So after washing his hands and face, the whole day he had worked, so now he went to the bedroom where Maggie was lying. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him from the snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, pleadingly. So he found Maggie lying on the bed, and she had tender, grateful, and pleading looks in her eyes. Means she was grateful to Mr. Thompson and she was pleading. Her eyes had pleading expressions, which meant that she wanted Mr. Thompson to show his kindness towards the girl. How heart swelled in his bosom. Now, his heart swelled in his bosom means he really felt pity for the girl. With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats, and then his heartbeats were very quick because he had that tender feeling for the girl. Joe sat down and now, for the first time examining the thin frame carefully under the lamplight, saw that it was an attractive face and full of a childish sweetness which suffering had not been able to obliterate. So now, for the first time, Mr. Joe Thompson, he sat by this girl and examined and observed her carefully that she was a very lean and thin kind of a girl. And under the light of the lamp, he saw that her face was really very attractive and it had all the childish sweetness in it. And all the suffering which the girl was undergoing, that suffering was not able to obliterate. Obliterate means it was not able to remove all the sweetness of this girl. Your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft little hand in his. So he asked her about her name. She replied, Yes, sir. Her voice struck a chord that quivered in a low strain of music. So the voice of the girl has been compared to a low strain of music here. Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was in her voice. So Maggie replied that yes, she has been sick for long, and there was sweet patience in her tone. Has the doctor been to see you? He used to come. So then Maggie replied that doctor used to come to see her when she was in her mother's house. But not lately? No, sir. Have you any pain? Sometimes, but not now. So Maggie replied that she had pain, but not now. When had you pain? This morning my side ached and my back hurt when you carried me. So Maggie told Mr. Joe Thompson when she had pain last time. It hurts you to be lifted or moved about? So Thompson asked her if she gets hurt when she is lifted in the arms or when she is moved from one place to another. Maggie replied, Yes, sir. Your side doesn't ache now? Maggie replied, No, sir. Does it ache a great deal? Maggie replied, Yes, sir. but it hasn't ached any since I have been on this soft bed. The soft bed feels good. So Mr. Thompson replied that the soft bed really gives comfort to someone. Oh, yes, sir, so good. What a satisfaction mingled with gratitude was in her voice. So Maggie replied that yes, sir, it is so good lying on the soft bed. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. So Mrs. Thompson did not enter the room, but from the door itself, she asked her husband to come and have supper. Joe glanced from his wife's face to that of Maggie. She understood him and answered. So Joe directly did not ask his wife about Maggie's supper, but Mrs. Thompson, she understood what Mr. Joe wanted to ask. And Mrs. Thompson replied, "She can wait until we are done, and then I will bring her something to eat." So Mrs. Thompson understood what her husband wanted to ask her, that her husband was concerned about Maggie's supper. So Mrs. Thompson replied that I will bring something to eat her after we are done. There was an effort of indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson. So this shows that Mrs. Thompson was really getting kind towards the girl. She had started developing feeling in her heart for the girl. There was an effort of indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed. So Mrs. Thompson, she replied, she tried to pretend that she is indifferent, like she is not very concerned about this girl. But Mr. Thompson was aware that his wife has really developed tender feelings for the girl. Joe waited after sitting down to the table for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts. So both of them, both Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, had a thought about what is to be done with Maggie, but still Joe did not start up the topic. But she kept silent on that frame for many minutes, and he maintained like reserve. Both of them, she here means she here refers to Mrs. Joe Thompson, and he here refers to Mr. Thompson. So both the husband and the wife, they did not take up the topic. At last, she said abruptly, and at last, Mrs. Joe Thompson broke the ice and she said abruptly, "What are you going to do with that child?" "I thought you understood me, that she was to go to the poorhouse," replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. So Mrs. Joe Thompson wanted to know what is to be done with the child. And Mr. Thompson, like he showed that he was a little bit firm. And now he is not going to keep Maggie in his house. And he replied to his wife that, "I hope you understood that she is to go to the poorhouse." Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments. Sonic moments means for some seconds. She looked at her husband and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. So again, this subject was not taken up. That means Mrs. Thompson or Joe Thompson, both of them, they did not take up this subject. They did not talk about Maggie. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took him into Maggie. After having their meal, Mrs. Joe Thompson, she took a slice of bread and then she softened it with milk and butter, and then she prepared tea for Maggie and then took these things for Maggie and held the small waiter on which she had placed them while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. So Mrs. Joe Thompson stood by Maggie and she kept there only. She held that waiter means the tray, as Maggie was eating the supper, or Maggie was eating whatever was given to her, and she was eating it with every sign of pleasure. That means Maggie was very happy to receive a good food there, and she was really very happy to receive the love from this couple. "Is it good?" asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing what a keen relish the food was taken. So Mrs. Thompson asked Maggie if the food was good. When she found that Maggie was enjoying the food that was provided to her, the child paused with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life old human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. So the child here means Maggie. She paused and then she replied to Mrs. Maggie. And then the way Maggie had replied and the look of gratitude which she had in her eyes, though that look, it awoke new life to old human feelings. That means the old human feelings which were there in the heart of Mrs. Thompson, that was slumbering. Slumbering means that was sleeping in the heart of this lady. The motherly feelings which Mrs. Thompson had in her feelings, in her heart, those feelings awoke. "We'll keep her a day or two longer. She's so weak and helpless," said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the first morning that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. So now in next morning during the breakfast time, Mrs. Thompson, she replied or she answered to her husband that we will keep this girl for a day or two because she is very weak and she is helpless now. Before Mr. Joe Thompson could see the guardians, "She'll be so much in your way," said Joe. Mr. Joe, he pretended that he doesn't want Maggie to be there in his house, and he told his wife that she would be trouble, like she would be so much in your way means she would be a trouble for Mrs. Thompson. "I shan't mind that for a day or two, poor thing." But Mrs. Thompson, as tender feelings have crept up in her heart now, so she replied that no, that trouble won't be, like she won't mind the trouble for one day or two, and she felt pity for the girl. Joe did not see the guardian of the poor on that day, on the next day, nor on the day following. So thereafter, Mr. Joe Thompson he did not see to go. He did not go to see the guardians of the poor on that very day, next day, nor on the next day. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account. So, in fact, after that day, Mr. Joe Thompson never went to see the guardian so that Maggie can be sent to the poorhouse. For in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abode in the almshouse as sending Maggie there. So, in a week, in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson developed a love for this girl. I mean, she really became fond of this girl that she would never think of leaving this girl in the poor house. Rather, she would herself go to that almshouse where she had tried or she was asking to send Maggie. What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? So now the presence of Maggie seems like bringing a light and blessing in the life of this couple. It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself and so became sore, irritable, ill tempered, and self affliction in the desolation of a woman's nature. So, since this couple did not have a child, that is why the atmosphere of the house was dark, cold, and miserable. But now um, that that atmosphere had become lit with the love of this girl. That is why, I mean, since there was no one in the house to be loved, that is why Joe's wife had become very sore, irritable, ill tempered, and self afflicted. I mean, she had started giving pain to herself because she had no one to love. Now, the sweetness of that sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience, and gratitude, was as honey to her soul, and she carried her carried in her heart as well as in her arms a precious burden. Now, the sweetness of that sick child, the sweetness of Maggie, and taking care of Maggie with lots of love, patience, and gratitude, that had become a soul to her, honey to her soul. That means she had started loving the girl, and now she took this precious burden. That means she carried this precious burden, which is Maggie, both in her arms as well as in her heart. That means Maggie had really made a very good place in the heart of Mrs. Thompson. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. That means Mr. Joe Thompson also became a very happy man thereafter. He would be the happiest man around. An angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. Now, both Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were very happy because an angel, that is Maggie, had come in their house disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child. It seemed as if Maggie has come into their life disguised as an angel. And now the presence of Maggie has filled the dreary means the boring, the dull rooms with all the sunshine of love. Means now the couple became a happy couple, leaving all the dreary things of the house aside, and the house was filled with light. The house was filled with lots of love. So, through this poem, the writer wants to convey that not only does Maggie need the care of another to survive, but Mrs. Thompson also needs Maggie as someone to care and love for, to live a happy and prosperous life. Mrs. Thompson gets a direction to lead a pleasant life with the presence of Maggie in her life.